Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hello, my friend, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. Today's episode is the second episode in our fertility series for the month of April. During the month of April this year, it actually falls April 21st through the 27th, is National Infertility Awareness Week, but we are celebrating the whole entire month by going through some of these important topics related to fertility. So last week, I did a solo episode that was going through my personal journey and story with endometriosis and fertility so far. And these next three episodes, including today, will feature a special guest who has a different area of expertise related to this topic. So today's guest is Jessica Sorensen, and she is a reproductive and perinatal therapist who is based in Roseville, California. She owns her own practice called Bloomwell Therapy, where she helps people who are struggling with challenges ranging from infertility to pregnancy and postpartum. So she kind of goes through the whole range there. She provides virtual therapy to anybody located within the state of California. And she loves providing that holistic approach, which is something that we really connected on and something that we chat about within this episode that I think you guys will love, that focuses on both the mind and the body. So kind of a connection between the two, which I believe is super important as well. And she loves to just provide compassionate support to people who are struggling with these unique situations and has some strategies that are tailored specifically for you to help you build resilience and gain confidence as you're navigating your journey. And that's what she's going to be sharing with us today. We had this beautiful conversation all about the ins and outs of basically taking care of your mental and physical health when you are going through a fertility journey. I think it's a conversation that's really powerful, and I'm excited to share with you all today. So without further ado, I will let Jessica take it away. All right. Hello, Jessica, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited and honored to be in this space with you.
Awesome. Well, the feeling is mutual. I'm very excited to have you on here today, and I know everything you talk about is definitely something that is so valuable for everybody listening. So I'm excited to share that today.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I would love if you can start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit about your personal story and journey and how you came to be doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I would love to start there. I think that it kind of goes into a mix of professional and personal. So I am a licensed therapist in California, and I'm the owner of Bloomwell Therapy. And I provide virtual therapy services to California residents, specializing in reproductive and perinatal mental health. And so really that's just, two big words saying that I focus my work on anyone who's going through struggles or that journey from fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and into parenthood. But before I was in private practice, I was a licensed clinical social worker in the hospital setting, and I spent about 6 years there. And I primarily worked in maternal newborn, NICU, high-risk maternity. I even spent a little stint in the adult ICU during the COVID pandemic. So kind of this, plethora of work that I did. But what transitioned me into private practice was seeing all of these challenges that, individuals face on this journey, and how really that healing takes place outside of the hospital. We go home and we are walking away with all of these really heavy experiences. And so I wanted to be able to hold that space and help people with that journey of healing outside of that immediate crisis, so to speak. And then coupled with my personal experiences. So I am a mom of one and went through that journey while I was working in the hospital setting. And then coupled with my own experiences of secondary infertility, I too was diagnosed with stage 3 endometriosis. And so I think, it feels a bit full circle even coming onto this space with you and talking to this population of people, because I have had this experience and it is such a journey, and there's so much healing that takes place physically and emotionally. So I just have such a huge passion for this population.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think that's something that's so powerful, is to hear, because I know you're going to give us some practical information and stuff along the way as well. But just the fact that you have that personal experience, you've been there, you've walked the journey, you know what it's like. I think that gives so much more impact and value to what you're going to share. And also just the compassion that I know you have for everybody in this space. So I think that is beautiful. And thank you so much for being willing to come on here and talk about it, because I know it's not always an easy thing to talk about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's something that I've learned to start talking about. And I think it's so important. As therapists, we're really taught to have this like blank slate mentality in our work. But, I think it's something important to share about myself in the work I have with my clients. It's really this different piece, like when you truly have walked that journey and you get it to some extent, right? All of our journeys are different, but I've been through some of these experiences, and there's such a community out there of support for women where, just knowing that we're not alone in this, and that there's other people who can relate to it is, I think, huge.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, infertility, of course, is a struggle that is very common with endometriosis, as you've experienced, as I've experienced, as I'm sure much of the audience listening here has experienced as well. And of course, mental health really is a big piece of that. And that's what we're here to chat about today. So I was wondering if you can just, because I know we work with that population a lot, if you can just speak to that a little bit, and just some of the common struggles and things that you see women with fertility coming in with.
Yeah. So, infertility can be both physically and emotionally taxing for women, especially when we couple it with chronic illness such as endometriosis, and juggling all the layered pieces of infertility. And then we're tacking on juggling this, management of endo. And what I would say in my work is several common struggles I see when going through this infertility journey is grief and loss, identity and self-worth, relationship strains, isolation, feelings of stigma around what they're going through, anxiety and depression, decision-making challenges, coping with medical procedures on top of all of these things, right? Financial barriers. And I say this like long list of things because I think it's so important to recognize that this is a very layered experience. When we talk about an infertility journey, we're not just speaking of, I'm walking in and I'm going to these medical appointments and I leave. No, there's so much more to it that impacts us physically and emotionally. So someone who's, on their endo journey, but also being faced with infertility, they may be balancing surgeries, treatment recommendations, right? And then it's impacting those experiences of that unknown journey or the loss that we may endure through that. So, Yeah, so many things.
Yeah. I love that you're touching base on all of that though, because there is so much that goes into it. And I think that's largely why I wanted to have you on here today, is just to speak to that, and more than anything, just to help people to understand and recognize that they're not alone in that. You're not crazy for feeling all the different things that go along with it, because I think so often in the medical world, and there are so many doctors out there who are very kind and compassionate and care about their patients, but they still have that limited time, right? You're in and out of their office in 10, 15 minutes. They just don't have the time or the space or probably the training to really help people through all of the mental struggles that go along with it. So I love that you're just bringing light to all of that.
Absolutely. Something that I hope it's okay to share, in this space is my personal experience of going into fertility clinics as, right, a professional in mental health and in this area. I so vividly remember sitting in my, room, waiting for my doctor to come in and hearing another woman crying in the room next to me, right? And hearing the doctor walk out and then hearing the doctor come into my room. And I think it just speaks to what you mentioned of they are busy. They're on this schedule of appointments. Maybe the training and support isn't there for what women are going through emotionally, but it is heavy and scary. And I think that when we go back into that idea of identity and self-worth and stigma, right? So many times what I hear is women feeling like they are not allowed to grieve what they're going through, that they need to keep going. And, when they do reach out for support or share what they're going through, a lot of the times it's coupled with these dismissive statements of, well, at least you can try again, or at least you can do this, right? And that just like leads to this cycle of isolation and feeling like they can't share their experiences. Grief and loss is also still there when you go through a failed cycle, or you get told that you have to have another surgery before you can pursue treatment, or that you have to do another surgery, right? All these things, and just really setting that space of like, yes, you are allowed to grieve just like the person next to you. You can hold space for both sets of emotions, right? And then if we jump to the idea of, let's say you do get pregnant and you are so excited, but now you're scared and nervous, or you're still thinking about those really challenging times. Yes, you can hold space for both. You don't have to dismiss what you went through in order to get pregnant, or you don't have to dismiss your failed cycle as not counting as a loss or miscarriage, because I think it's so valid in feeling like that is a huge loss.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And this is not something that I've even talked about a whole lot on the podcast, but I have been through IVF myself and did experience a failed round. And I was honestly, because obviously, that that's a possibility going into it. In fact, a high possibility, but I was not prepared for the amount of grief that was going to come along with that. It was a surprise to me, and I kind of didn't know how to handle that and how to deal with that. So I'm glad that you're speaking to that, and just knowing that that's normal. That's part of the healing process for so many people.
Yeah, first off, thank you for sharing that, because I too, I understand that feeling of it being so vulnerable. I've been through IVF, I've had a failed cycle, and I love that you touch on that feeling of grief, because I know for myself it was extremely heavy, and you don't realize, I think, going into it, how heavy that grief can be. I think it's so easy. I often talk to individuals about this like idea of a train that we're on during those times of our fertility treatment, right? You get on this train and you're going, and it's so easy to just stay on that train and keep going. And we don't pause to kind of like not stay away from the train, but just like get off for just a second. And take like a breath and say, wow, what journey have I been on and what have I gone through? Because I can say for myself, speaking, when I went through that failed cycle, it was a surgery that I had to go through. And then, okay, well, these are the next steps, or these are the odds of doing another cycle. And you don't really get that second to say, wait, I've gone through some really heavy things. I think I need a minute to grieve what I've been through. We don't need to dismiss it and put it away.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that really leads right into the next conversation that I know is something that you talk about a lot, just reproductive trauma. And that's something that is not a term that I was even super familiar with. Again, it's something that's just not really talked about, but I think that really ties into what we've already been touching on so far today. So I was wondering if you can, first of all, just share what that means, because sometimes just having a name to what you're experiencing can be really powerful. So you know that you're not alone. And just how somebody who may be struggling with that reproductive trauma can support themselves.
Yeah, so I love that we're touching on this. Oftentimes, especially what I'm seeing on social media right now, is this growing discussion on birth trauma, which I think is so powerful and exciting to see this movement. So when you hear the words reproductive trauma, really, this is that umbrella term that includes birth trauma as well, but it's referring to any distressing event that's occurred during the experiences related to infertility, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, right? So, really, that whole experience. And this includes the women that are going through these struggles of infertility, right? And IVF and IUI and all these treatments. And it's such a variety of experiences. And I like to say, too, when we say trauma or traumatic responses, we're speaking to those various emotions and like those physical reactions that can be felt after a distressing event. And this commonly can happen through the journey of infertility, not just birth and postpartum, because we know, just like we mentioned our own experiences, these are hard and heavy things. And so going into that, sometimes when we experience something that is traumatic or heavy, difficult, right? Our nervous system can process it and store it where it feels like a distant memory. Maybe we look back on something and it feels a little grainy and foggy. It doesn't give us that emotional reaction that it once did, right? That's this like common response of our nervous system digesting things like it should and storing it. Other times when we experience things that are really distressful, our nervous system is not quite digesting it the way that it would another memory, right? And so this is where it brings in that response, that traumatic response that our bodies are holding on to because it is trying to keep us safe. And so, it's trying to differentiate those things. And I think what I commonly hear is, the response of like, well, I logically know that I'm okay and I'm at home and I'm in this present moment, but I'm feeling, let's say, anxious and overstimulated, and I keep thinking about this memory, so to speak, right? And again, that's that example of our bodies trying to keep us safe from all those heavy things that we've been through. And it's proven that when we go through something distressing and traumatic, our nervous system, our brains are still looping in that memory, right? And so, it causes this like effect of fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And that could be a whole conversation. But what I like to say is really when you, on the day to day, you feel those feelings of fear which is really what commonly we say is anxiety. Anxiety is that fear really amplified. Just like I mentioned, overstimulation, irritability, low mood, brain fog, right? And so when we're feeling all those things, it's really like giving ourselves grace of saying, this is not something that like I'm in control of in this moment. This is my nervous system trying to make sense of these difficult experiences and trying to keep me safe from all of these hard things that I've been through, and giving space to it, right? Because so oftentimes when we go through fertility treatment, for example, we are going to appointments like every other day, right? We're waiting for that egg retrieval date, so to speak, all these things. And so emotionally, we're putting it in a container and we're putting it on the shelf, and we're like, I'm going to keep going. I need to, keep being strong and doing all these things to get from point A to point B. But what happens is we keep putting those things in that container. And if we don't go back to it, that container gets full, it gets dusty, and eventually it wants to explode. And that will happen at the most inconvenient times. And we want to go back to that container. So think of that container as your nervous system needing to digest and store those experiences, because right now it's trying to figure it out and it's doing the best it can through these hard things. Yeah. So that's one piece of it. I feel like I could continue to talk about it, but from that, it's helpful to know that when our nervous systems are responding to this distressing event, right, it can lead to those emotional mental health impacts, such as that increased risk of anxiety, depression, even PTSD. Again, we are now talking more about the trauma that can happen in, post-birth, which is great, or the birthing experience. However, yes, for all the women who have gone through these fertility experiences, it can happen to you too, right? Like, it is hard stuff, and our bodies and our minds are responding to that. And so, what I will say again, when you go back to that idea of that container, is it's so important to hold space for your emotions, to know that it's okay to grieve, and that it's okay to acknowledge the hard things that your mind and body are trying to process and go through. From a therapeutic lens, like, we know that we can treat trauma, such with modalities like EMDR, which is something that I practice, and it can have profound impacts of letting your nervous system really heal and digest those difficult and traumatic things that people have been through during this journey. But in terms of like supporting yourself in this experience, if you're like, yes, this is me, I've been through some really hard things and I'm feeling this way, really like seeking professional support from a reproductive or perinatal therapist, someone who is trauma informed, possibly practices EMDR therapy or other trauma informed modalities, connecting with a support group. That, going back to that idea of isolation, it can really feel lonely what we're going through. And I think it's really important to find that community, because there are people out there that want that same support, and are wanting to talk about it when it feels safe to do so. Other things would be like open communication, talking to your medical team if you need to like take a breath and regroup, or if you have an idea of what feels empowering for you on your journey, speaking to that. Boundaries, knowing who feels safe to talk to, who doesn't, and giving yourself permission to say, I'm going to keep, this person handy to talk to, but maybe I'm going to take a step back in this space because this feels dismissive to my experience, and knowing that's okay. I often say that, when somebody's coming to you and either asking you of something or you're, asking of your experience, before you respond, are you genuinely wanting to respond to that person and share your experience, or are you saying no to what you need? Right? Like, are you quickly responding and then you just feel icky because that didn't feel honoring to what you needed? And I think that's really important. Saying yes to yourself on this journey. We don't need to do everything. We don't need to keep it all together. We are allowed to say this is hard and to take a step back. And then that goes into, right, giving yourself that opportunity to grieve, giving yourself opportunity for self-care. If you think about yourself on that train, on that fertility journey, and you can't remember the last time you got off to take care of yourself for a moment, we are so deserving of that self-care. And what I often see is when we have this reproductive trauma and our bodies feel out of control, or we're grieving and we're, going through these hard things, we start to lose the self-esteem aspect, the trust with the body. And so oftentimes discussions I have with individuals is, are you feeling like you trust your body? Are you feeling in tune with it? And if you're not, like, let's talk about it and find a space that we can get you back to trusting it. Because a lot of the times through these fertility journey, you're losing that sense of trust and that self-esteem. So giving yourself that time to get back in tune with it, I think, is really important and also helpful for grounding our bodies when we are feeling this traumatic response that we talked about, right? That fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response that can happen.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. I love all the actionable tips that you're giving, because I personally find that it's really empowering just to know that there's something, like you have some tools in your tool belt that you can refer back to when you're in those moments when you're struggling or trying to figure out what the next best step is for yourself and all the things. So I love that you're giving us some actual tools that we can use along the way. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's hard. We can hear things and be like, okay, but what do I actually do? What do I do next to help with this? And I think, just like you mentioned, right, having those tools on hand is really helpful. So starting off small and even saying like, I'm going to walk away today knowing and recognizing that, my reproductive journey has been hard. I'm going to say yes to myself and my emotions today. That's a huge win. And just acknowledging that.
Yeah, absolutely is. I totally agree. Now, we've touched base a little bit already today on the topic of grief. And I know that this is something that is challenging for a lot of people to just look at in the first place, much less talk about, have a conversation around. And I think that's where mental health professionals like yourself can be really beneficial. But of course, when you are going through the infertility journey, especially if you've had pregnancy loss, miscarriage, those failed transfers we were talking about, any of the things that can come along with that, of course, grief is something that comes up for so many people. And it just can be something that's so big and challenging to cope with. And I know you already gave us so many wonderful tools along the way, but I was wondering if you can give us a little bit of an idea of just where to even begin if you are struggling with grief, and what are some of the strategies and tools that you would use with clients, or that you would just recommend with or patients, sorry, for you, that you would recommend, people to help to work through that grief.
Yeah, I think that this is a great question and a good thing to touch on with the differences of like reproductive trauma and grief. So grief is a highly personal experience. And I always like to say it is not a linear experience. And a lot of the times I see individuals who have this expectation that their grief should be on a timeline of like these stages that we often hear about. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize that, again, our grief is unique and you do not have to just get over it. You do not have to hit these like stages of grief perfectly and walk through it and be like, okay, I'm ready to move on. I feel better. Grief is much more, it's deeper than that, right? And so when we are looking at the differences of reproductive trauma and grief, they can feel really intertwined. So like, you know, I have my hands together and like interlocking my fingers, but they really can feel intertwined. And what we want to do in, let's say, the therapeutic process is really peel those two things apart. So just like I mentioned before, we know we can treat trauma with evidence-based modalities such as EMDR therapy and others. Grief is this different process. It's actually giving space to really process your grief, honor it, something that we don't have to store and put away. So really starting with acknowledging it and validating that you're on your grieving path. And, you know, whether it's going through the fertility treatment process, going through pregnancy loss, birth trauma, whatever it might be, is knowing that like your grief is an expression of love. And so your love doesn't have to go away, right? It may change and evolve. It may get to a point that you can honor it and then go back and you're doing what you were doing, right? Like going through your daily routine. It will get easier, but it doesn't have to go away and you don't have to tuck it away and move on. So when you feel like you're in the depths of your grief and it feels really heavy, knowing that it's going to be a journey and one day you're going to get to this, you know, path where you can be doing something, you're out with your family, let's say, and you think about it and you honor it, and then you're able to be present with your family, right? But to get to that journey where you're able to navigate it in this smooth way, so to speak, start with acknowledging it and validating it and knowing that it doesn't have to go away and that you don't have to dismiss it. Seeking support, right? Knowing that it's important to process and talk about if it feels safe to do so, and honoring for you, finding ways to express your grief. So if you are the type of person that's like, I really don't feel ready to talk about it, that's okay. Let's find ways to digest it, whether that's journaling through your experience, scheduling a time to grieve. I know that can sound silly to some, but genuinely, like if you're going through your workday and you're like feeling, you know, that impact, you're feeling that low mood or you're feeling anxious and it's that grief coming up, schedule some time to sit down and to honor it. I think that's really important. Connecting with nature and moving your body, right? Establishing boundaries again that feel honoring for you. You don't have to talk to everybody about your grief, and you can pick and choose who those people are. And then again, giving yourself permission for self-care. And self-care does not have to be something big or something that you have to like leave the house for, so to speak. It can be something as simple as nourishing your body with nutritional foods, not skipping a meal, going on a walk, or just sitting out in the sunshine if you're recovering from, a surgery or an experience from your pregnancy journey. Really like leaning into the little things, I think, is so important.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. I love all of that. So it's all things that can be such a powerful practice as you're going through that. And again, just having actionable tools in your tool belt, I go back to that again, I think is super powerful and important when you're along that journey, because it can just feel so big and heavy and powerful and overwhelming. And
yes,
I love that you're giving us some tools that we can use along the way. Now, I know that you just touched on this a little bit as well, and I know that it's something that you and I are both big believers in, is that connection between your mind, your body, and your spirit, that we are human beings, we are a whole body, we are a whole person. And I was wondering if that's something that you could touch base on a little bit, and just how women can support themselves through those multiple modalities and kind of zooming out and looking at the big picture.
Yeah, so it is definitely something that I'm passionate about, is this holistic lens. And, we talked just really briefly on like your nervous system, but that is so connected in how, we're looking at our mind, body, our spirit, everything. And to get back in tune with that, we want to lean into different modalities that are speaking to each of those layers. And that's something that's really important to, I think, both of us. So I had somebody say to me this, or share with me this table analogy on my endo and fertility journey. And it's something that I hold on to in my practice as a therapist as well. And it's this analogy of a table. And so you have this table with your four legs, and you need all four legs to stand up, right? You need for this table to be sturdy. So one of the legs is stress, movement, sleep, and nutrition. And so when you think about this table with all four legs, we want it to stand up. And oftentimes my clients will be like, okay, I need to take care of my stress, my movement, my sleep, and my nutrition. And we don't need to do all of these at once, right? So let's say they're working with you and they're working on nutrition. They start with their healthy eating habits, really nourishing their body. And that is going to give us energy to move our bodies. And then it's giving us that ability to sleep better. And then we're decreasing our stress. And so it's all coming together to get that table to stand up. And so I really like to think about that table not only on my journey, but on my clients' journeys of saying, start off really small with self-care. It doesn't have to be this really big thing where we go on like a vacation, right? Starting with the basics of like our holistic mind, body, and spirit. Nourish our body. Let's think about our sleeping habits and our movement. So when we go to this idea of like our mind, that can be therapeutic support. It could be implementing healthy breathing habits that are really grounding for our body, especially if we're having that traumatic response that we talked about. And then we can go to body. This can be yoga. That's very grounding for our body when we're having those trauma responses, getting outside and walking. It may sound silly, but even walking barefoot in the grass, picking up some ice cubes and holding them in your hands, right? Really getting in tune with your response to your body. And then with your spirit, connecting with nature, journaling, I think is really helpful for this. Just as I mentioned earlier, oftentimes I see this level of distrust with our bodies and what we're going through on this journey. And I think it's really helpful to take that time to lean into that like spiritual aspect, whatever it might be. And then the nutritional support, right? Nourishing our bodies, not skipping meals, really treating our bodies almost with this like level of respect of what am I giving it, and gaining back that trust. And then, the other aspect of letting that all come together over time. Again, we don't have to do all of these things at once. So, going back to that table, right? We don't need to put up all four legs at the same time. It's going to take time, and that's okay. But just picking something small to start with and building that into your daily routine can be so helpful on this journey.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. That's something that I definitely work on with my clients as well, is it's okay to go slow, right? We don't have to completely flip your life upside down. In fact, I feel like most of the time when you try to make too many changes at once, it ends up becoming just overwhelming and unsustainable in the long run, because there's just so much happening, so many changes. And I really love, and especially because when you're going through an infertility journey, there you already have a lot going on just with that, right? So trying to add in all the things may not be the most beneficial, but find the thing that maybe resonates with you most right now, that your body is telling you it needs the most, and starting with that, and then take it one little piece at a time. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. Even if it's just something as simple as rest, right? Oftentimes we feel this like we're not allowed to rest, we need to do more. And during these journeys of fertility, pregnancy, wherever you may be, knowing that rest is productive. And that is a part of that holistic lens of looking at our mind, body, and spirit and knowing what it needs, and leaning into that.
Yep. Totally agree. Yeah. Well, I feel like we have covered a lot today, and I think there's so much in this episode. This might be one that you save and come back to when you need a new tool, right? Maybe you pick one thing from this episode that really resonated with you, work with that for a little while, see how that feels in your body, and then you can always come back and listen to this all over again and find another little nugget that will help you moving forward, and just kind of use that as an ongoing process. I think that could be really powerful. Is there anything else that you feel like you would love to touch base on that we haven't talked about yet today?
Yeah, we touched on a lot, and went on to different paths, and it's such a layered experience, right? There's so many things we can talk about. But I always like to say at the end of it is that if you are on this journey and you're needing that space to process these things, just knowing that support is out there, whether, it's reaching for like nutritional support, a support group, therapy, it is for everyone. You don't have to be at this like point of crisis to get that support, and just knowing that it's available and that people are out there who really like get it and understand what you might be going through.
Nice. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Jessica. It's been such a powerful and beautiful conversation. I love that you're digging into all the layers and all the little nooks and crannies of the experience. And I'm sure people are going to want to connect with you, hang out with you, learn more about you. Can you tell us a little bit more about where we can find you and potentially work with you in the future?
Yeah, so I am very active on my Instagram. Just kind of spreading education and tips on reproductive and perinatal mental health. That's at Holistic Perinatal Therapist. I also have a free monthly newsletter that I share wellness tips along this journey, and monthly blog posts that can be helpful. And that is at bloomwelltherapy.com. I'd love for anybody to reach out if questions come up, or things resonated. You can send me a message on either my website or Instagram. I'm active on both.
Nice. And thank you. And I will link all that in the show notes. So if you need to go back and reference that later, you can find all of that information there. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was, so full circle to be in this space. And thank you for sharing your experience too.
Of course. Yeah. Happy to. And I hope that this has helped some of you out there along your journey. This is why I do what I do, and I know for you as well. So I hope that this has been helpful for everybody. Sending you all lots of love, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you loved what you heard, be sure to leave a review, share with a friend, and subscribe so you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step toward getting to the root of your endo symptoms like endobelly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to take my Endo Reset free course. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Till next time, my friend.